This video is sponsored by Incogni. It's a service that helps protect your privacy by taking your personal data off the market. All you have to do is go to incogni.com/companyman. Plus, the first 100 people to use the code companyman will get 20% off. The link is in the description. TJ Maxx. I'm guessing most of us have been there, considering they're one of the country's biggest, most successful retail chains. There are now over 1,200 of them across the United States, and that is just part of the picture. TJ Maxx is owned by a larger company called TJX that owns almost 5,000 stores operating internationally under a variety of brands that combine for almost $50 billion in sales. It makes them one of the top 100 companies in the country. The big thing that makes them stand out from most of the other retailers is the fact that they use an off-price model. Certainly not the originators of the concept, but they now do it in many different ways and do it bigger than anyone else. Basically, it's all about purchasing, taking advantage of attractive buying opportunities, in many cases straight from the manufacturers. If they happen to produce too much of something, if someone else cancels their order, or maybe it's been sitting there for too long becoming out of date, there are so many reasons someone could be stuck with some unwanted inventory that they'd be willing to sell at a discount just to get rid of it, and that is where TJ Maxx comes in. They'll buy it at a reduced price and sell it in their stores for typically 20 to 60% below competing retailers. And since they're always getting different stuff from different places, their assortment of items that you find at the store changes much quicker. They even make a point to avoid permanent fixtures or placing walls between departments so they can more easily adjust those sections based on their changing inventory.
No, it's never ever the same place twice.
That's the main idea behind off-pricing. Again, TJ Maxx did not invent the concept, but they are currently the biggest store in the world to utilize it, and it is generally used by the other TJX brands as well. It's a bit of a complicated story that includes so many significant retail chains from the past and the present. It's almost unbelievable how far all of this stretches. So for this video, I'm going to talk about the size of TJX by highlighting 12 different retailers that have at least at one point been under their control. The first one being Zayre, because this is where it all started. Well, the roots of everything technically go back further, but in short, two cousins with the last name of Feldberg started a department store in the 1950s. They were influenced by both of their fathers, who were brothers that had previously started their own retail company together. The idea behind Zayre was that everyone was moving out to the suburbs at that time, so there was an opportunity to open a department store there. And it got pretty big, eventually growing to 400 locations before experiencing major trouble in the 1980s. By the end of that decade, they were reporting losses, and I think the main issue behind it was a simple lack of attention. By that time, TJ Maxx and a few other chains had become the new priority, and the Zayre stores were becoming poorly maintained. By 1988, the bad performance and a new strategy refocusing toward the more successful brands caused the still-named Zayre company to sell all of their Zayre stores. The buyer was another major retailer at the time called Ames, who paid over $400 million for them, which probably was not the best decision. A couple years later, Ames filed for bankruptcy partially because of the struggling sales from the newly acquired Zayre stores. Following that bankruptcy, the Zayre name was discontinued when all of the remaining stores were either transformed into Ames or shut down altogether. The next one is called a Hit or a Miss, acquired by Zayre back in 1969, and is significant because this is where the company first became involved with off-pricing. Hit or Miss specialized in higher-end women's clothing that was sold at lower prices due to similar methods to what I described earlier. And they grew pretty big as well. At their peak, they had almost 600 stores. However, in 1995, they were separated from the overall company when they were sold to members of its management team. And then there was another change of ownership as they continued to close stores before ultimately filing for bankruptcy in the year 2000. The next significant store is probably the most significant, TJ Maxx. See, in the 1970s, off-price retail was gaining traction. It was a slow economy at the time, making cheaper prices look especially attractive to the public. Like many others, Zayre saw high potential in operating stores like that, and since they were already a sizable retailer, they initially wanted to expand upon their hit and miss chain by acquiring Marshalls. It was still a comparatively small market, but Marshalls was the leader of it and continued to be the leader well into the 1990s. That deal ended up not happening, so their second approach was to hire Marshalls' general merchandising manager named Ben Camerata and give him the task of creating a new store that was very similar to to Marshalls. Remember that this model was all about purchasing and inventory, so the merchandising manager would be the person you want. The first ever TJ Maxx opened in 1977, specializing in family apparel and home fashions, very similar to how we know them today. It was a big success almost instantly, opening a second one within the year and hundreds of them within the decade. In 1989, with Zayre stores separated from the company and TJ Maxx being at the core of things, it only made sense to change their name from Zayre to TJX, which is how it remains today. And by the way, Ben Camerata, the guy hired from Marshalls, remained with the company for the next 30 plus years, at different times serving as president, CEO, and chairman of the board. Alright, those were some of the bigger ones, so I'm going to start going faster with some of these, like when I talk about Chadwick's of Boston. You know, Boston makes sense. All of this originated around Massachusetts. This one was an original creation by the company, created in 1983, still following the off-price model, mostly for women's clothing, but this time was a catalog, meant to complement those other chains of physical stores. This one too proved to be successful for a time in that the sales through the catalog grew every year. It was separated from TJX in 1996 when it was sold to the owner of another women's clothing retailer called Lane Bryant for $300 million. The money that was gained from it was used to pay down the debt that had been added from a key acquisition the year before that I will get into shortly. But first, BJ's Wholesale Club. Probably one you didn't expect to hear. In the early 1980s, these large club warehouse type stores were becoming really popular. I have a video about Sam's Club versus Costco that details what was going on there, but shortly after those two chains were established, Zayre saw an opportunity to start their own. They called it BJ's, named after Beverly Jean, the daughter of the executive put in charge of starting it, and to go along with this, I need to mention Home Club. This was a chain of home improvement stores acquired by Zayre in 1985, and then 4 years later, when the overall company was getting rid of Zayre and trying to focus on TJ Maxx and the stronger core brands, they took BJ's Wholesale Club and Home Club, put them together, and spun them off into their own company called Waybon. Throughout the 1990s, BJ's emerged to be the more successful of the two, so they were separated in 1997. From there, Home Club continued to struggle, changing their name a couple times before ultimately filing for bankruptcy. But BJ's has continued to do really well. Today, they exist as a chain of more than 200 warehouse stores throughout the eastern part of the country. You wouldn't know by looking at it, so maybe you're surprised to learn that the company who created that store was the same company who created TJ Maxx. Next up is Winners, a name that likely sounds familiar to anyone living in Canada because this is the biggest part of their Canadian operations. I guess it's kind of like the Canadian version of TJ Maxx in that they specialize in off-price family apparel and home fashions. They were acquired by TJX in 1990 when they only had 5 stores and have since grown to almost 300, making them the largest of their kind in that country. Next on my list is Home Goods, all one word. They sell various things for your home, like furniture, rugs, decorations, cookware. It was a concept originated by TJX in 1992 and has since grown into 850 locations, making Home Goods the third largest chain owned by them. Continuing to move fast, next up is TK Maxx, which I know almost sounds like an error to anyone watching this in the United States, but that is actually the European version of TJ Maxx. It can be found in Australia as well. As far as I could tell, the two stores are very similar, if not the exact same thing. It's just that in 1994, when they were looking to expand the TJ Maxx brand over into Europe, they discovered that there was already a popular department store chain in the UK called TJ Hughes. They just didn't want things to be confusing, and they have built over 600 of them, making TK Maxx the only major European retailer of their kind. I've been going chronologically here as to when the chain became a part of the company, which is why it has taken me so long to get to what I consider to be their most important acquisition ever. In 1995, they acquired Marshalls for about $600 million, and believe me, in the world of off-price retailers, this is the biggest deal imaginable. Remember, in the 1970s, before TJ Maxx ever even existed, Marshalls was the biggest, and they were able to hold on to that #1 position up until 1993, when they were finally surpassed by TJ Maxx. So when the deal took place 2 years later, they were still by far the two biggest, not even that different from each other. Marshalls had 500 stores, while TJ Maxx had 571. Part of the reason Marshalls was able to stay so competitive for so long is because they too were owned by a much larger company. In 1976, when they only had 32 stores, they were bought by Melville, a company originally known for their shoes, but they expanded into all forms of retail. Well, by 1995, Melville's most successful brand was CVS, and they were looking to sell almost everything else that wasn't CVS, including Marshalls. TJX saw that as a huge opportunity to take out their core competitor while seeing some advantages from economies of scale. And once the two were together, TJX was able to reverse that downward downward trend happening at Marshall's by integrating the chain into their existing, more efficient operations and by closing dozens of underperforming stores. These two have remained the company's two biggest chains, growing at a similar rate, but with Marshall's always a little behind TJ Maxx. Alright, there's only two more to go. The first one being AJ Wright. Again, another off-price retail chain, not entirely different from TJ Maxx or Marshall's. It was started in 1998, and for years they kept pushing forward with the idea, opening more and more stores, saying that it had high potential, but it never was all that successful. They did quickly grow to 150 locations before deciding to close some of them and reposition the brand, which I don't believe did too much to help things considering they were discontinued altogether by 2012. And then, finally, the last one would be HomeSense, of course. In 2001, it was originally meant to be a slightly, I guess, expanded version of HomeGoods for the Canadian market. So there you have it, a dozen different retail chains that have all been significant to TJX in one way or another. And it's not even a complete list. I could have mentioned Bob's stores that they owned from 2003 to 2008, or Sierra Trading Post that they acquired in 2012. There's too much going on here. Instead of detailing every little aspect, my main intention here was to give an overview of all of these different endeavors to hopefully give you a picture of how this company has grown and progressed into something that may, in fact, be bigger than you know. Let me know in the comments, what do you think of TJ Maxx or Marshall's or any of these other stores? Again, there's so many of them. So, of course, let me know what your favorite one is of the group, but also let me know about any similarities or differences you've noticed between them. Do they all make sense in being part of the same company, or are there any that stand out? And any other thoughts you have about any of this, leave them in the comments. I'd like to hear what you have to say. Today's sponsor is Incogni. Without even knowing about it, there are thousands of companies out there collecting and even trading your personal data. That's concerning, right? It's personal data, and they're treating it like baseball cards. It could lead to spam emails, phone calls, and even targeted ads on websites. It all feels invasive to me, so you should know that you do have the right to request that they delete your information. But like I said, there are so many of these companies out there, and you can't do it all yourself. That is where Incogni can help by reaching out to these data brokers on your behalf. That's what they've been doing for me for months now. Every week, they email me a report about the removal requests that they've sent. The most recent one shows 140 requests sent, 52 in progress, and 88 of them completed. To sign up, simply go to incogni.com/companyman, and don't forget that the first 100 people to do it will get 20% off their purchase. Thank you for watching.